Indo-China. The first question is, we have to write short notes on what was meant by civilizing mission of the colonizers and Hyun Fu So. Civilizing mission, like any other European country who made colonies, like British in India, the French also, or any other country which made colonies, they claim that first of all they need resources, they need land, they need area. Then after that, the second important thing what they want to do is they want to bring modern civilization to the country or to the region where they are making colonies or they are ruling. That is true with the Vietnamese also. So the opinion was that the Europe has advanced civilization. French understand that they have the best civilization which is already developed, and now it is duty of the Europeans to introduce these modern ideas, modern civilization into the colonies which are not civilized. You can say they are under civilized. So they introduced modern education, or wherever they went, they introduced modern education. For example, the Tonkin free schools were opened to provide modern education. And the real motive was, that is, because these resources were there, all the natural and human resources, specifically if we talk about Vietnam, the main idea was to use them, exploit them. This is what civilizing mission actually meant. Then Hyun Fu So. So he was a Buddhist religious scholar who was native of the Mekong River Delta. Now, what was his role in arousing or helping the anti-imperialist sentiments? First, founder of Hoa Hao movement. So Hyun Fu, he was the founder of this Hoa Hao movement, which drew on religious ideas popular in the anti-French uprisings of the 19th century. Social reformer, as a social reformer, he was great in that, as he opposed the sale of child brides, gambling, and the use of alcohol and opium, and struggle against the foreign rule. Hyun Fu So, he faced great deal of trouble when he began to spread the ideas of religion, and because most of his followers were Vietnamese nationalists. So the government, the French, they declared him mad, and they called him as Mad Bones. They put him in mental asylum also, and when the doctor came to treat him and the doctor became follower of this guy, the French authorities exiled him to Laos and sent many of his followers to the concentration camps. Explain. Only 1/3 of the students in Vietnam would pass the school leaving examination. So this was largely because of there was a well thought, deliberate policy of failing the students, particularly in the final year. That is, if they qualify, they will be able to, they are now a candidate for better paid jobs. So only 2/3 of the students were failed, or means as many as 2/3 of the students are failed, and this is how the 1/3 of the student would pass. And if we take an example, 1925, 1.7 crores. If you see 1.7 millions we better understand, only 400 were passed. Then the second is, French began building canals and draining lands in the Mekong Delta. So the French began building canal and draining the lands in the Mekong Delta in order to increase cultivation, especially rice. So the vast system of irrigation works like canals and earthworks, built mainly from the forced labor, that is the Vietnamese labor, this increased the rice production, and this also allowed the export of rice to the international market. That is, the area of cultivation, it went higher and higher by the years. That is, it was around 2,74,000 hectares in 1873. It became 1.1 million hectares in around 1900 and about 2.2 million in 1930. So Vietnam exported 2/3 of its rice production. By 1931, it was the third largest exporter of the rice in the world. Then we have the government made the Saigon native school, girls school, take back the students it had expelled. There is one more question which can come, like why did major protest erupt in 1926 in the Saigon native girls school in Vietnam? And then we have described the incident that took place in 1926 in Saigon native girls school, and also the question one more will be there, that is we'll be discussing this later on. Rats were most common in the modern newly built areas of Hanoi. So in 1926, major protest erupted in the Saigon native girls school. Why? Because there was a Vietnamese girl who was sitting in the front seat, and this girl was asked to sit back, means in the back row, because the place has to be occupied by one of the French girl. So this Vietnamese girl refused, that she is not going to leave the space or leave the place, and she is not going to sit on the back, means on the back row, back bench. The principal, as he was a colon, that is, he was a French people who are in the colonies, he just expelled her. But when the students and other people joined for a protest, finally they were also expelled, and this leads to spread of open protest. And when the situation was going out of hand, out of control for this principal, the government forced the school to take back the student, the girl student and other students. Then we have the French. The question is, rats were most common in the modern newly built areas of Hanoi. So this is a place. Okay, so this is what happened. The French part of Hanoi was built as a beautiful and clean city with wide avenues and well laid out sewer system, while the native quarter was not provided with any modern facilities. That is, one city was made very good. The refuge from the old city drained straight, but in the river or during heavy rains or floods, it overflowed on the street. So what was installed to create hygienic environment in the French city, this became the cause of the plague. And there were very good large sewers in the modern city of the Hanoi. That is the symbol, it was the symbol of modernity, where an ideal and which acted as an ideal and protected breeding grounds for the rats. So the sewers, this also, like these were sewers all below the city. So this acted for the mouse, or for the mouse population, as a great transport system. They can go anywhere now in the city, just underground, without any problem. So rats begin to enter the well-cared home of the French through the sewage pipes, and this is how the question has been answered. The rats were very common, or most common, in the modern newly built areas of Hanoi. Describe the ideas behind the Tonkin Free School. To what extent was it a typical example of colonial ideas in Vietnam? So ideas behind Tonkin schools were like this. First, to spread the Western style education. That is, these schools were started in 1907 to provide the Western style education. And this education includes classes in science, hygiene and French. And these classes were held in the evening, and they have to be paid separately. That is, separate class, and they have to be paid also. And the idea was to consolidate their power. So the French were faced with yet another problem in the sphere of education. The elites in Vietnam were forcefully influenced by the Chinese culture. And to consolidate their power, this French had to counter these Chinese influence of culture and various other things in the society of Vietnamese. So they systematically dismantled the traditional educational system and established the French school for the Vietnam people. Then we have educated labor for administration. French were not that much, so they need educated labor, local labor force. For that, these schools were started. And then to demonstrate superiority of French culture. Many scholars believe that that by learning the language, the Vietnamese would be introduced to the culture and civilization of France, and that will help to create an Asiatic France solidly tied to the European France. Okay, so the educated people in Vietnam now would respect the French sentiments and the ideals and see the superiority of French culture and work for the French people. So this is how the thing took place, and there are so many things others that came in. That is, to what extent was it a typical example of colonial ideas in Vietnam? So we are now answering the second part. The second part says that it was a typical example of colonial ideas. Why? Because to civilize the people, the French and other colony people have started from their land, you can say. So like the British in India, the French also claimed that they were bringing the modern civilization to the Vietnamese. They took for granted that Europe had developed the advanced civilization. They are already evolved and civilized. So now it is their duty, that is duty of the Europeans, to civilize the other people also, like those of the third world, like Vietnam, India, etc. And they were ready to destroy the culture, religion and traditions, because for them, what they understand is these cultures and traditions are the, you can say, roadblocks of modern development, or prevented the people from developing further. Then racial discrimination policy. The French consider themselves as a superior race. They started policy of discrimination even in the school. The front rows in the school were reserved for the French students only. Vietnamese can only sit in the back benches. Then justification of French rule. The textbook, the books which the school has, or school curriculum has, this textbook glorified the French and justified the colonial rule. So the Vietnamese were represented as a primitive and backward, not only capable of doing manual labor, but not of intellectual reflection. They could work in the fields, but not rule themselves, and they are just skilled copies. They are not at all creative. So school children were told that only French rule could ensure peace in Vietnam. Then use of education to change the value and culture. By introducing the French schools, the French tried to change the values, the norms and perceptions of the people, to make them believe in the superiority of French civilization and the inferiority of the Vietnamese. Then finally, the failing the Vietnamese in the final year, only the Vietnamese elite, that is comprising of very small fraction of the population, could enroll in the school, and only a few among these, those which are admitted, were allowed, or they would ultimately pass the examination. And this was just because there was a proper deliberate policy of failing the students, particularly in the final year, so that they could not qualify for the better paid jobs that were held by mostly the colons, the French living in Vietnam. What was Phan Chu Trinh objective of the Vietnam? How were his ideas different from those of Phan Boi Chau? So these were two different people, but they have same idea, means same path. They want something similar, but the path, the thinking were different. Phan Boi Chau and Phan Chu Trinh, they both were Vietnamese nationalists to the core, but were absolutely anti-colonialist, worked to free Vietnam from the French domination, French colonialism. So Chau and Trinh both wanted to modernize Vietnam. So you can say that both have the same end, they are looking for the same end, like the free, sovereign, modern Vietnam, or you can say democratic Vietnam, like this. But they differed in the means to pursue the same end, and their views are different. The issues can be briefly, we can tabulate like this. So the issue is monarchy. what Fan Bai Chao thought was, he accepted monarchy and wanted to make use of this monarchy to achieve the goal. He did not want any popular uprising against monarchy. So he was in favor of monarchy. And he also advocated for the help of court to resist the French. But Fan Chao Trin, he wished to overthrow monarchy outrightly. He just wanted to throw this monarchy, and he planned to rouse or affect or influence people to abolish monarchy, and opposed to the idea of resisting the French with the help of the court. And here court means the you can say monarchy. Democracy, when the idea is or issue is democracy, Fan Bai Chao, profoundly influenced by Chinese or China, accepted a political framework headed by monarch. So he was in accordance with the monarchy. But Fan Chu Trin, he was influenced by the democratic ideas of the West. So he desired to establish a democratic republic. When it comes to modernization, Fan Bai Chao, his priority was to drive the French out. But Fan Chu Trin, he wanted the French to set up a legal and educational institution and also develop the Vietnamese agriculture and industries. So this is the different ideas, but they both want the same end. How did the textbooks represent Vietnamese during the period of French colonization? Explain. So school textbooks glorified the French and justified the colonial rule, while these Vietnamese were represented or presented as backward people or primitive people. They are capable of, these Vietnamese, they are written as only capable of doing manual labor but not of any intellectual reflection. They could work in the fields, but they may not be able to rule. They were skilled copyists, that is, they can only copy, but they are not creative at all. And school children were told that only French rule could ensure peace in Vietnam. Since the establishment of French rule, the Vietnamese peasant no longer lives in the constant fear or terror of the pirates. To counter the Chinese influence, what steps did the French take in the sphere of education? What were the two broad opinions on this question? So to counter Chinese influence, French took the following step. What were this? Because, there was the influence of China or Chinese culture was too much in the Vietnamese culture. So they are just intermingled. So what the French did, they dismantled the traditional education system of Vietnam. They established French school in Vietnam, school for the Vietnam people or Vietnamese. They propagated Western culture among the Vietnamese youth, and the few who learned French and acquired the French culture were to be rewarded with French citizenship. So there were two broad opinions, the second part we are taking. Some emphasize the need to use the French, this language as a medium of instruction. Others were opposed to French being only the medium of instruction. They suggested that French to be taught in the higher classes, but in the lower classes it is better to teach the Vietnamese. How was the idea of looking modern implemented in Tonkin Free School? Explain. So the students were suggested to adopt the Western style of education first of all, and this education included classes in science, hygiene and French. Traditionally the Vietnamese, they used to keep long hairs, but they were asked to cut hairs and keep short hairs. These schools also encouraged students to now wear Western clothes and to play the Western games like lawn tennis, etc. So French prompted the youths to study the Western customs as well. How did the long war between the US and Vietnam come to an end? First, the US white went there to fight and to help the French. It just failed to achieve its objective. Vietnam resistance could not be crushed. Vietnam people were totally resistant. It proved very costly for US, and there were high casualties on the US side. It was casualty in Vietnam side also, but who will care, because Vietnam is a third world country. Only people care about US. So it was the first war shown on the television. Battles were shown on daily news world over. So it was the first television war. People were disillusioned with the US and its policy of war, and policy of war was was severely criticized, and widespread questioning of government policy strengthened moves to end war. And finally, a peace treaty was signed in Paris in January 1974. This is how the war ended. Explain the reason for the French colonizers to scrap the bounty program for rat hunting in 1902-1903. The same question can be asked like this: what was the purpose to start rat hunt program by the French in Vietnam in 1902? How was the purpose got defeated? And describe the rat hunt activity introduced by the French in Vietnam. So first is the modern part of Hanoi. It was struck by bubonic plague. Plague is caused by, in this case, by mouses. To fight the plague, the French started rat hunt program in 1902. Now the local people were paid for each rat they hunted. The purpose of rat hunt was totally defeated. The French hired with a Vietnamese worker to catch the rats and paid them for the same. And this was a failed attempt. Vietnamese, they befooled the government by just showing the tail, and they just allow a rat to go free. They took it as a way to earn profit from the French government. Defeated by the resistance of the weak, the French were forced to scrap the bounty program. Now we are taking the multiple choice questions or MCQ of this chapter. The first one is, why was the Tonkin Free School started in 1907 in Vietnam? The answer is to provide the Western style education. This is the answer. Then, who among the following was the founder of Hoa Hao movement in Vietnam? He was Huynh Phu So. Which one of the following was not an impact of Great Depression of 1930s on Vietnam? Not an impact. The answer is Vietnam was occupied by Japan. This was not because price of rice and rubber fell, unemployment was there, rural uprising was there. But the Japan occupation was not the outcome of this one. Which one of the following was an impact of the Great Depression of 1930s on Vietnam? Now the answer is that price of rice and rubber increased. There was a decrease in unemployment. There was uprising in rural areas. So which one of the following was an impact of Great Depression? See, these are all the options. But here the catch is, the answer is A. Japan defeated and occupied Vietnam. So this is the answer. Now which one of the following statement is not true about Trung sisters of Vietnam? The answer is Phan Boi Chau wrote a play on the lives of Trung sisters. The next one is, this is the answer actually. Next one is, which one of the following is true about Phan Chu Trinh? The answer is this one. He wanted Vietnam to be a democratic republic. This was Phan Chu Trinh objective and mission. In which famous battle were the French defeated? The answer is Dien Bien Phu. Which European country colonized Vietnam? This one. 8th. The answer is France. This because it was French colony. The Vietnam was a French colony. 9th. Which society did Phan Boi Chau form? The answer is he formed Revolutionary Society. In which of the following areas of Vietnam did the French build a canal to increase the cultivation for export? The answer is C. In the region of Mekong. This is a river, Mekong Delta. By whom was the Democratic Republic of Vietnam formed? Democratic Republic of Vietnam. The answer is Ho Chi Minh. At which of the following places were the French finally defeated by the Vietnamese in 1954? The answer here is Dien Bien Phu. Dien Bien Phu. Or Dien Bien Phu. You can pronounce it like this. But which of the following persons was the Vietnamese Communist Party established in 1930? The answer here is Ho Chi Minh. What does NLF stand for? And the answer is National Liberation Front, NLF. What is referred to as the Ho Chi Minh Trial? The answer is an immense network of roads made to transport men and material from north to south. So this was a path actually like this. It was mostly the route is in Laos and Cambodia, and it goes into the Vietnam. So this is Laos, this is Cambodia, and here we have Vietnam. So this is the not trial, it's trail, it's the path, it's the route. In Indo-China, who was referred to as colon or colon? It refers to, the word has come from colony or colonization. The answer here is the French citizens living in Vietnam. Next is, which of the following was the most important cause of colonization of Vietnamese by the French? The answer, of course, is need of constant supply of raw materials. Then we have, which of the following best explain civilizing mission? The answer here is a belief that Europeans are the most superior and has a duty to civilize the natives of the colonies or the under-civilized. So they have already achieved the civilization, best civilized people they are, Europeans. Why did the French follow a deliberate policy of failing the Vietnamese students in the final year? Here the answer would be A, this one. So that the Vietnamese could not qualify for better paid jobs. In 1926, why was there a major protest movement in Saigon native school? A Vietnamese girl sitting in the front was asked to move in the back seat, where the front seat has to be occupied by some French girl. So this stirred or this created a controversy. What kind of party was the party of Young Annan set up in 1920? A political party. 22. Which of the following statement best explains syncretic tradition? The answer is the tradition that combines Buddhism with local beliefs. Syncretic. This is 22nd. Then the next one is the Trung sisters were well known in Vietnamese history because. 23rd, the answer is they were patriots who fought to save Vietnam from the Chinese attack. Next is indentured labor referred to. Indentured, and this is contracted labor for plantations, rubber plantations basically. Which of the following movements started in Vietnam in 1868 against the spread of Christianity by the French? The answer is the Scholars' Revolt. This was the first revolt. By which country was the domino effect theory advocated? The answer is America. Domino effect. When and where was the peace settlement signed to end the conflict between Vietnam and United States of America? The answer here is 1974 in Paris. Which of the following was the most visible form of French control of Vietnam? The answer is it's B, military and economic control. According to the French, the best way to civilize the natives was to introduce Western education among the natives, that is the Vietnamese. With what main aim did the French introduce French language as medium of instruction? The answer here is the French believed that educated in France, the Vietnamese would respect French sentiments. They will understand French culture and they will be a part of the French colony. They will live properly. Why did America decide to intervene in Vietnamese civil war? The reason is America wanted to check the spread of communism Samyavadita by destroying communist Vietnamese government? And of course, wanted to help France, the NATO ally. In 1603, why did the rat hunt begin in Vietnam? The answer is the rat carried the germs of bubonic plague, a dangerous disease.